Welcome to our podcast. I'm Evan.
I'm Lucas.
I'm Zaid.
I'm Akshit.
All right, so I don't know if you guys remember, but when I was a freshman, I'm a sophomore now, when I came into the virtual orientation, I saw a video during my orientation where it was this student who explained how she was top of her class in high school, straight A's, never really a struggle with a lot of her classes, and all of a sudden she comes to Michigan and she takes organic chemistry. And this for her first time failing. She had to actually switch out of the class because she didn't want it on her transcript, and it was really a culture shock. She explained how it was imposter syndrome for her, but this extremely hard Weeder course it made her struggle a lot, and she had to drop it. And so I don't know if you guys remember that video, if you have similar experiences, but I just remember watching that, and it scared me at first, but I'm not taking organic chemistry, which is good, but it's definitely a Weeder course, and it got me thinking about them.
Yeah, so kind of on the flip side, my roommate actually is also taking Orgo. I've known this guy for a long time, went to middle school, high school with him, and he wasn't necessarily always top of the class, but he was a smart kid. And coming here, he really kind of got his act together. Before class even started during welcome week, I would walk in on him in the room and he would have an Orgo textbook and he's just reading this, as prep before the class even started. And this guy's taking a relatively lighter workload credit wise, in that he's only taking like 14, 15 credits, but the credits he's taking themselves are actually really hard. Like he's taking honors calculus, he's taking Orgo, um, and he's dead set on pre-med. And it brings up this issue where when you have to go into specific pathways such as pre-med and engineering, you have a very rigorous course load. You have a very rigorous academic journey purely based off the courses you take. And to do well in this course, to do well in this kind of a pathway, kind of, going off of what Evan said, most of these people that come to U of M, all of us were, high achieving students. You come to, U of M, and from there it's the top of the top of the top, right? Those are the kids that get the A's. This kid comes in and he gets 100% on the first exam, 100% on the second exam. But let me take you through what a day in his life is. This kid wakes up at 5 a.m. He studies till 7 a.m. Then he goes to his 8:30 class, an hour and a half early, to talk to his professor. After that, he has some time between his next class. So he usually goes to something like the SLC, or he goes to the math lab, or he goes to Fishbowl, and he studies again. He goes to the rest of his classes, and usually I might see him at home maybe once to get lunch because we have an apartment, and then he's back out studying again. And next time I see him is 1 a.m., 1:30 when he's coming home to sleep. And periodically he'll take naps during the week because, when you're sleeping as little as he is, it kind of catches up. And for example, this kid yesterday, I walk out of my bedroom and at like 9 a.m., this kid has a piece of cardboard and thumbtacks and rubber bands, and ask him what he's doing. He's like, I was reading about this thing in my Orgo textbook and I found it really interesting, and so I decided to go out and buy these materials and do a little project myself. And he'll talk about other kids in his class, all high achieving students, but they're really trying to do the bare minimum and expect to still get an A, because a lot of us got away with that in high school because we're smart kids. You come here and a lot of kids don't even read the textbook. They just go to lectures and expect to know the material. Whereas this kid, to do as well as he does in Orgo, has to go, not just, read the textbook and go to lectures. He's going early, outside of class period, to talk to the professor, going to office hours, going and studying as much as he does. And it really kind of demonstrates the contrast between the amount of stress that someone who wants to do well academically has to take on versus someone that would rather prioritize something like a social life or personal development, because he spent so much time academically that he's starting to like lack, or not lack, but he's missing out on, the other things that really turn you from a boy into a man, essentially, right? You come to college to learn how to become an adult. He's missing out on the networking, the building long relationships, the fun experiences, because he's putting all his time into academics.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. I think it's a good point you mentioned because for being a doctor, like for example, if you're a doctor and all you can do, is for example, just do like chemical reactions every time. The thing is, being a doctor is a lot more than just like being rock solid at science. Although that is a big part of being a doctor, obviously, but it's also having like the social skills of, for example, talking to patients. Also like being able to um, like volunteering, for example. I know is like a really important part of pre med. And that's almost expected now. Like every pre-med student should be like volunteering, for example, or they should volunteer at the hospital and getting like clinic hours. So I think, like for example, if you have to take like 2 weeks per semester, that obviously eats up a lot of your time to like do all these extra things outside of class, which is important for the pre-med track. So I think that's kind of where pre-med becomes a little unintuitive because you take all these weeder classes, and that eats into your things for like things you do outside of class, which I think is important for like a pre-med application, for example.
I would say that another big issue with these weeder courses is that they promote a very toxic environment among students. So, for example, I am in Ross, and the majority of my classes are graded on the Ross curve. So, what this means is that only 20% of the class can get an A, 20% can get an A minus, and so on and so forth. So, what this means is that if I am going to succeed in these classes and get that top grade, I need my classmates to fail pretty much. And a lot of the people that I've talked to in Ross that are older have told me how their classmates are never willing to help them. Like if they ask their classmates to send them a notes for a class they missed or to explain a problem that they don't understand, they are unwilling to help them because at the end of the day, if they are helping you, they're hurting themselves.
So, what would you guys say to those people who are saying that weeder courses are actually beneficial? Because, like we mentioned, if you want to be a doctor, you have to be top of the top. You don't want to walk into a doctor's office with someone who was able to fail their freshman year course and then all of a sudden be treating you. Or an engineer. You don't want an engineer building bridges if they failed their class and they don't know the fundamentals. So, what would you say to those people who say that they're beneficial because of the career paths they're going down?
So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to like, say you're talking about a career path such as pre-med, where obviously you want your surgeon to be able to, perform a successful surgery. I think at the end of the day, it shouldn't come down to who can, you know, stay up the latest and study and memorize the best. Although that at the end of the day will create successful doctors, it leads to, something we'll talk about later on is, big shortages in the industry right now and a lot of resentment to the actual career path. I think what we have to focus on is creating and exposing students to other opportunities that are also necessary when you're actually, on a pre-med path. For example, my roommate, or I'll go back a little bit. We'll go even to high school, right? All of us here to get into U of M had to do stuff besides having the grades. All of us had the grades. That is merely just a baseline to get into U of M, right? Me personally, I was, captain of 2 sports teams. I was president of X amount of clubs. Volunteer work. That's what got me in. That's what we did as students. A lot of us did to get into U of M is the stuff that we did outside of the classroom. My roommate right now, even though he's only a first semester freshman, he's already a certified EMT. He's part of 3 clubs. He's he's doing research at a lab right now. He's doing stuff outside of academics to get himself into pre-med and to get himself into med school and stay at the top of the pre-med track. And I really think that I would put an emphasis on exposing students to opportunities and having it be that the top of the pre-med track, quote unquote, are the people who have the most initiative, who go out and actually pursue those opportunities. You merely make it available to them, but the people that go out and actually pursue them are going to be the people that are going to be the top of their class, right? Most of the time, I'll make the argument when I'm talking to friends that when I go out, because I applied pre-med to LSA first when I was applying to Ross. You have to get into LSA before you get into Ross. I applied for pre-med, and I loved pre-med in the sense that I loved going out and shadowing doctors. I loved internships. I loved writing research papers. But at the end of the day, yeah, I hated taking classes like AP Bio and AP Chem. Those were not fun times, right? And I liked being able to go out and actually do stuff. That's why I ultimately pursued business, is because the entire like shtick of Ross is going out doing action-based learning, going out and actually learning how to do stuff yourself. And I think that actually going out and learning through like internships, learning through real life experiences at the end of the day is always going to be a more valuable experience than just learning, you know, how to do Lewis structures in a classroom. And those are obviously important, but I think you have to restructure the information in a way that makes it more appealing and more applicable to your career path.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you talked about like the shortage, and that was something that me and Evan noticed while doing some research for this topic. I want to bring up a data point. So there was like a recent report from Arizona State University. They found out that economic projections point to a need for approximately 1 million more STEM professionals in the United States to like meet the demands by 2025. Um, and and from what I can interpret from the idea of the weeder courses of like filtering students out of high demand high difficulty majors, for example, I feel like weeders themselves aren't really the solution. If anything, there should be like we should be trying to like get more people into it, into like those majors. But I do think there's a good point made that we don't want just anybody to become a doctor. We don't want anyone to just become an engineer, because if anyone can build a bridge, we probably will have pretty bad roads. If we just have anyone become a doctor, I think our medical situation in this country will look almost like a third world country. So I think the solution lies in a sense. It's a complicated solution. Like for me to just come up with one on the spot is quite challenging. I think for anyone to come up with a solution is difficult, but it's more of a societal change that's come. And what I think that one solution that, for example, a college student could take is in classes like, for example, Orgo, which is a leader in this university. I think that if students are struggling in Orgo, for example, like they should, take initiative of like the help here. For example, the Science Learning Center at the University of Michigan. I actually have like my Math 156 class. We actually have an SLC group, but there's a lot of people in my class did not join it, which I thought was kind of interesting. But it has been one of the big reasons why I've actually done pretty good in the class. I have an A at the moment, and I would attribute a lot of success to that class, to like the SLC review classes, because it does reinforce a lot of the concepts that we learn in class. And I believe the SLC has groups for Orgo, Orgo 1, Orgo 2, and all the main science classes. So I think this for weeders to become less of a weeder experience for students. I think it's important for students, for example, to take initiative of the help, because the University of Michigan does give a lot of help. I'll give them a lot of credit for that, for providing the resources. But I think students have to take the initiative of actually using those resources that's provided, with the tuition that comes with attending this college. So.
I would say another important element to consider of these weeder courses is that in a lot of scenarios there ends up being kids that grew up wanting to be a doctor because maybe their dad or their mom or another relative was, and they just really found it really awesome how they could help people, and then they get to college and they have to do these weeder courses and they just end up hating it. The dream that they had since they were a little boy or girl just ends up dying. And I think it kind of sucks how just because someone can't do well on a test, just because they can't sit down for 8 hours just going through this book, it doesn't necessarily mean that they wouldn't be able to be a successful doctor in the future. So I think it would be great if we could find another alternative where a student, if they're struggling in one of these weeder courses, there's another path that they can take where they still end up learning all this material and can become a doctor, because just because they don't succeed in these weeder courses doesn't mean that in every scenario they would not be able to be a great doctor.
Yeah, so kind of like to summarize and, add some of my own insight, I think that kind of going off of what you just said, one of the things that we have to focus on is something I want to emphasize, is something that Akshay actually said earlier, is that we need to have kind of a cultural shift as students. Kind of going off of what we were talking about earlier, a lot of us came into this university not really having to try the hardest in high school to do well in the hardest classes even, right? But you come here, and to do well in weeder courses, it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of humility, and that you have to recognize that you're among kids that are smarter than you, but at the end of the day, the kids that are smarter than you are the kids that also work the hardest. And so one of the things we have to realize is that us as students, we have to recognize that, yeah, it's okay to go out and seek help. And just because you're going out to like a study session or you're going to office hours, doesn't necessarily make you any worse of a student. If anything, you'll come out on top because of that. And then the second thing is that, yeah, besides, us being students, we have to also place a bigger emphasis. The professors have to place a bigger emphasis on actually, teaching the content better. So, for example, we've talked about how I've given the example about how like I think it's better to go out and actually, have real life experiences, instead of going out and just learning everything through a textbook. I find it amazing. For example, I'll bring up Ross because I'm a Ross student too. I think it's great that you can go out and actually do challenges. Like, for example, right now I'm in a business challenge where I'm actually creating a company, and I'm being guided by professionals in that industry to learn how to pitch, to learn how to fundraise, to learn how to make my idea come into fruition, get investors. We have investment challenges. We have real estate challenges. That's outside of the classroom, stuff that you can do to get involved. There's clubs that have great support systems. You have pathways to internships at Ross. So that's one thing that, although academically Ross has its issues, I think that Ross is really good outside of the classroom too. At the same time, even in classes such as Orgo, you'll see discrepancies among professors. My roommate will talk about how his professor is actually the guy that wrote the textbook that they used to teach Orgo here. And that he was telling me how his professor, he was talking to him at one of these office hours, his professor was saying that he can tell what kind of professor you had based off of the way you go around answering a problem. If you're the kind of person that, you see a problem and you have an analytical background, you approach it from like, you have to do this and look at what happens here and this, then you're probably being taught by this professor. If you're look at a problem and you straight up answer the question, you don't really show work whatsoever. He's like, you probably are from this guy. You probably focus solely on memorization. And my roommate will always brag about how great his Orgo professor is because he teaches Orgo in a way where, for example, yesterday he was reading me the intro to his textbook, which his teacher wrote, and it actually likens Orgo to Alice in Wonderland, right? He creates like an engaging environment where students that are interested in maybe pre-med but aren't interested in the specific section of like Orgo, they still can find the class interesting, or they can at least be engaged enough that they can do well in the class and not have the pathway be totally taken out of the question. Like, you can't be a doctor anymore because you can't do X, Y, and Z in this specific class.
Yeah, so I think just to make sure that our audience walks away with a few key points, I just want 3 key takeaways. The first one is going to be perspective. I think, as we just talked about, actually, everyone has their own schedule. Everyone has their own out-of-class life. Everyone has their own life back home. Maybe there are struggles. Maybe there are distractions going on. Also, as Zaid just mentioned, everyone has their own professor. Every teacher goes about teaching in a different way. Every professor goes about teaching in a different way. And when you move to the next class, the next course, it might not be consistent with how you learn to approach problems. So that is definitely a big thing we should look at when it comes to Weeder courses. The next thing is opportunity. We heard Akshit talk about it a little bit. We heard Lucas talk about it a little bit. The opportunity not only to be able to succeed in your classes through reaching out to tutors on campus or reaching out to just resources, but also to be able to network, to be able to build out your resume, to get that experience, because that could be equally, if not more, interesting, engaging, and beneficial to the career that you are pursuing. So that is a big thing that we are trying to promote and encourage. And the last thing is that there is no easy solution. We're not here saying we have a solution. We are all at the University of Michigan. We all have our own schedules, own clubs, own extracurriculars. We can only understand and really see from the perspective of our schedules and our life. Maybe our friends as well through what they're doing and living with them. But really what we can understand is those schedules around us, and we can't understand everyone else's. So there's no easy solution. We mentioned societal shift, maybe different in teaching and how it is gone about. But we're not here to propose a solution. We're just here to share our insight and maybe provide those who can come up with a solution with the insight and maybe what to target in their solution. But with that said, thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully we helped you out. Maybe we just were able to, I don't know, talk about something that you're passionate about as well. So I really appreciate you guys listening for this time, and thank you.